So hello, everyone. Again, my name is Cathy. Deb, thank you so much for the introduction and just for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. And as I was listening to the tail end of the session before, I found myself wishing that I was able to hear all of it. It just sounds like wonderful, really, really wonderful work. I think that we're a place I always start when I think about cultural humility is really around my own identity and the identity of others. And then just in the course of a day, how many people I connect with and think about and I'm in conversation with. And, you know, for me, it's always that we're all learning and growing and becoming, and we get to do that, you know, on our own as individuals, but we also get to do that in this learning collaborative that you all are having. And we get to do it in the interactions that we have with other people every day. So just kind of thinking about, I guess how I think about it is that we're all a work in progress. And what I'm finding is that because times are tense, that people are being often very intense with one another. And I think civility sometimes goes out the window. And so while we're advocating for ourselves and amplifying voices of people who don't have access, as we're thinking about, you know, how do we leverage as much goodwill towards other human beings as we can, that, you know, cultural humility and just humility in general, you know, being human requires us to kind of press pause sometimes in the way that we interact with people. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of your time and my time kind of thinking about what that might look like and, you know, how bias interferes and some of those things. So I love Audre Lorde, and I had a whole bunch of her quotes, and this was one that I hadn't used before, but when I saw it, I was like, oh my goodness, this is perfect, right? This is where we're at. Like, we need to do stuff now if we're going to be changing people's lives. And just again, just from what I've been hearing about the work that you all are doing, you're already embracing this, that we need to do this in the now. So thinking about identity and belonging, that, you know, there are ways that we see ourselves and that we are viewed by others. We want other people to see us. And so that idea of, I want you to notice if my qualities, or I think my qualities are kindness and compassion and hard work, and that those are the things that are important to me, I want other people to notice that too. So when we talk about and think about how we see ourselves, it's actually, the concept is called preferred view, and it's how we want to be seen and how we see ourselves, right? And sometimes we act in alignment. So if it's important for me to be kind and caring and clear, that I want to be seen that way. I always want to be kind and caring and clear, but sometimes I don't. You know, sometimes we're just human and we make mistakes, or we're grumpy. You know, you wake up and you stub your toe before you get to your coffee, you know, so there's all kinds of things that can get in the way of how we show up. And so what's super important is to think then about identity is there really space for all of us? And so in the way that I show up today, am I bringing my best self? Or if it's a way that I show up today and, you know, I'm not at my best, I'm tired, I'm cranky, I'm hungry, whatever that may be, is there still room for me? Is there still space for me? And can we do that for each other? And so we have our individual identity. So I'm a Black woman, I'm a lesbian, I'm a grandma, I'm a mom. I like the grandma gig better than the mom gig because the grandma gig is more fun. So like we all have ways that we identify and all those personal pieces that are so important. And then there's ways that when we're together, these are the groups that feel good for me to belong to. So I like to belong to groups of other women, groups of other people, groups of other grandmothers, groups of other Black women, groups of other lesbians. So that I'm by myself, this is who I am. And then when I'm with these groups, it's like, these are the parts of my identity that feel like powerful and present. And then there's the way that we relate to one another. So when I relate to folks in this virtual way, I'm thoughtful about that, because I feel like, we've got a half an hour, we've got really short periods of time. We don't really get to know each other. We don't really get to know about one another. But when we're in person and we have more time and more connection, that always feels a little bit better to me. But I think we've gotten to a place where we need to figure that out, right? How do we maintain our own identities? How do we stay ourselves and, committed to ourselves and our own growth and development, and still be able to be real with people that we don't know very well and we've met in this virtual way? And so the way we are with each other matters. And we also need to notice ourselves if we're not being authentic. And so, there are things that you won't know about me because we have a few minutes, not because I'm hiding it, just because there's not enough time. And so sometimes I think we expect to be able to know each other even when we don't put in the time. So we make a lot of assumptions, and the assumptions that we make about each other, even when we don't mean them to be harmful, they can be. And so when we start to think about identity and how we connect to other people, identity and how connected we are to ourselves, we also just have to, at least when you look in the mirror, be able to say, I'm not always my authentic self. This is when I am, and this is when I'm not. And these might be the conditions. Doesn't make us bad people. It just means we have to give each other a little bit of grace, a little bit of patience, a little bit of kindness, giving people the benefit of the doubt that there might be more than what we get to see when we're with each other. And I think humility starts in that place, by giving people the benefit of the doubt that the person we're getting to know is not fully developed in front of us. So it's not fair if we fill in the gaps with our own assumptions. And that's something that happens because we're human. When we make assumptions, when we use power over, when we act on our perceptions of other people and we don't really check it out, that it really does change how we can be in community with one another. Like, it changes how much we love and how much we care, how much we express that. So, although not the whole story, but I do think that love and care and kindness can be deeply impacted by the use of power, perceptions, and assumptions. And that if we don't do anything about that, or if we just let it happen and we don't notice, that we're weakening our community. But when we notice, hey, wait a minute, that felt like a little power over. Can we talk more about that? Or I'm judging this person right now, and I can catch myself in that judgment. And I can wonder, well, what does that do to our relationship? What does it do to community? When we make assumptions about each other, what does it do to our community? It disrupts the ways we want to be. And so if we really want to be here, be kind, be fully present, it takes acknowledgement of when we assume, when we make guesses, and when we fill in the blanks for ourselves when we don't know everybody's facts. And so, just a thought about that around, what does it mean to care and care deeply, to recognize our own behaviors when we're assuming and presuming and using power over. I want to talk a little bit, this came initially from the Dismantling Racism curriculum, and it's people were doing this work, I don't know, in the 60s and in the 70s. And, there's a lot of conversation that's come up just in the last year and a half where it's like, what, we're still having some of those same conversations. And so I share this graphic because I've been using it for a really long time. And I was just reminded about, a week or so ago about how how present this all still is, right? Oppression exists because there is power and privilege, but it also exists because many of us participate in the perpetuation of it. And so we're all born with, kind of clean slate. There's sometimes some early trauma that impacts our lives before we know about it. But for the most part, we get our information about how the world works from our caregivers. And so whoever that caregiver is, or whoever those caregivers are, they sometimes give us information that's not quite accurate. That there's a lot of misinformation, there's bias, there's stereotypes. I grew up in a community that was mostly families of color and folks who came from all over the place, some professionals, some stay-at-home folks, some folks who were really struggling to put food on the table, and some folks who didn't worry about that, right? But there was a way that people had of talking to their kids about, don't go over here because that's not safe. So we lived in a neighborhood, and there were in homes, in single family homes. But in our 2-bedroom single family home, there were 10 people living in it. So yes, from the outside, we had a house. From the inside, it was a very crowded house. But down the hill from where we lived, there was a 10 building projects. Each project building was 3 floors. So 30 floors of people that, by the nature of where people lived, everyone in the community noticed and knew that those were folks who didn't have as much income as other folks. And so all kinds of assumptions, filling in the blanks about who those folks are. But when I was 4, one of the things my mother said to me is, don't go down to the projects, because I could leave my house at 4, go down the hill, I'd find money in the couch cushions, take all the change, and go to the store that was on the other side of the projects. And so it was a 5-minute walk, but I had to cross 2 streets. And at 4, I was good at it. And my mother didn't know I was so good at it. She didn't know I was doing it until the day I got caught. But what she said was, don't go through the projects. It's not safe. I don't want you down there. And what she really meant was, I don't want you leaving this street. I don't want you leaving the yard. I don't want you leaving the house. But the whole message was filled with all kinds of other stereotypes and information. So then we're socialized to places where, broader family systems, more neighbors, more school, media, and with social media, forget it, right? The authority figures, the places we worship, we get some of those same messages and assumptions about who's dangerous and who's not dangerous. And those very early messages get cemented by all kinds of other people. So think about how fast something is viral on the internet. Somebody does something, and before they even know it's public, it's everywhere. And then all the judgment and assumption pours in on top of it. We have cancel culture, where people's lives get deeply impacted by things that they say or do that are perceived to be the wrong thing to say or do, and everybody piles on. So there's not a lot of space for care and kindness and how we're seeing each other. And I'm not suggesting that everybody does good things. What I'm suggesting is that every single one of us is socialized with misinformation, biases, and stereotypes that get strengthened. So in my case, when I started elementary school, I was bused to all white schools. So there were 5 Black students, well, actually 4 Black students and 1 Chinese student in my elementary school. And that was my class all the way until I graduated from high school. So there were, when I graduated, there were 644 graduates. There were still 5 students of color. So in that environment, there's a lot of confirming about biases and stereotypes. And it came from everywhere. And so if you want to belong, then you start to believe and pile on and join in to all of that misinformation. And so that's how it works. to a point where we internalize all the bias, all the misinformation, and we start to believe that what we heard and see is all truth. And so we join in, and now we view the misinformation, the bias, the stereotyping as fact. And everyone who's different is now abnormal or wrong. And now the motivation is to maintain the status quo. So many of us have been on the outside of that status quo, either because of our racial identity, or because of our sexual identity, or because of how we present, or because of financial status, or because, like there's so many reasons that people are othered. But what happens is that even if you're one of the folks who has previously experienced that discrimination and bias and stereotyping, we also start to believe and join in the dominant culture beliefs and processes. So if the main line is that folks who are different are bad, that people of color are less than, or that somebody else is less human, less important, less anything, right? When we start to believe that and buy in, then we're now part of the problem. And so it calls on us to either take a stand or not. If we don't, we continue to perpetuate this cycle, and we contribute to the othering of other people, of additional people, of more people, for all the ways that folks can be different because they're not able-bodied or fully able-bodied, or we think different, we talk different, whatever that might be. Taking a stand means that we have to do something different. And what I'm noticing is that the more and more oppression gets discussed, and othering gets discussed, and racism gets discussed, and sexism gets discussed, that even on our responses to it, we are now othering other people. So it's really confusing and convoluted, and we feel justified when we call out bad behavior. But if we're not willing to have a conversation with people who matter to us, then we are now part of the problem. And so that's where cultural humility comes in for me. It's a lifelong process where we're expected to be open. We are expected to balance power. We are expected to self-reflect. We are interacting with people for our mutual benefit. So whenever we're interacting with others, it's on us, each and every one of us, to figure out, am I balancing power? Can I be open? Can I reflect on my own behavior and call myself out when I'm not doing such good things, right? It's like, that's what it takes. And if someone else points out that we are not using power in a good way, like some of us have formal authority, a lot of us and all of us have some form of power, and even people who are very oppressed can have some power that they tend to use over others who are more oppressed. So if we perpetuate that, and if we want to stop perpetuating it, then humility is one of the ways that we do it. It's really noticing, oh wait, I have more to learn and more to hear about people and their opinions, about their perspectives, about the way they communicate, about the way they own stuff or don't own it. And that even when someone is not behaving in a way that I appreciate, I'm still going to wonder, what's their deal? What's their story? What's that experience? When I'm working with groups where relationship matters. If I'm passing someone on the street and they're behaving in a way that's offensive to me, I'm probably not going to engage in that. I'm probably not going to be the one to stop and have a conversation, because I can't take it all on every day. But for groups, when someone that I know we're going to be interacting with for months, or we're going to be doing something together, we have a training together, or we have a meeting that we're planning together, or that we have an event that we're going to, some shared experience, then I'm going to take the time and wonder what's happening for that person that they're so closed. Because part of my job, when I'm interacting with folks that I care about is to be open, to be a lifelong learner, to balance power, and to critically self-reflect. That's on me to do, just like it's for each and every one of us to do. And so the question is, or the question becomes, are you willing? And so many of you may have seen this before. This is not new. It's been around a long time. But I've been finding that, more and more conversations involve this, that our reality is there are rampant inequities. They just are, right? And so we understand that reality, even if we use equality, which means we treat everybody the same, there's still going to be inequity. There's still going to be folks who can't see because we all got the same thing. When we look at equity, equity is different than equality in that people get what they need so that we can all see over the fence. But what I love about this is that liberation says, let's just remove the fence. And so in our work together, I've been part of learning collaboratives in the past. I've facilitated a few. And, I'm always thinking and looking at how do we remove the fence? What barriers are here? How can we remove it? Who's being impacted? How do we center our attention for all of us on the folks who are being impacted? Not just who's complaining, but who's impacted. How do we remove the barriers for those folks? Because when we do that for the most marginalized folks, everybody else benefits. Everybody. So how do we navigate that? How do we work with that? How can we think about, again, the needs of our most marginalized folks? And even when we are part of marginalized groups ourselves, how do we think about our most marginalized folks? And what can we do? So Barbara Love, a long time ago, created a model for thinking about humility, for thinking about, what's a good approach? What do we do? And I just love this piece of her work. And again, this is not new. It was just, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I was looking at, what's out here to have this conversation. And it turns out, sometimes what's old is new again and good for us to talk about. So in her work, what Barbara talks about is that we first need to be aware of what are people's challenges. And so if we're not curious and we're not open and we're thinking, it's all somebody else's problem, then we're not aware. So we have to figure out what's our level of awareness around people's challenges. And even again, within these marginalized groups or within a group, what are the challenges for folks who are maybe not saying what the challenges are, who are maybe feeling like there's no space for it. So humility says, wait a minute, let's press pause before we do anything else. Let's find out, how's everybody really doing? And are there, challenges and barriers that we're not aware of? So let's do that. Let's start with awareness. The analysis piece is really about, is there something we can do? So me as an individual, we as a community, is there anything that we can do when folks who are marginalized are struggling? And so not to act yet, but just to understand what are the challenges and what are the possibilities. Because the other thing we have to do before we take action is actually work with the folks who are marginalized, work with the folks who are at their most distressed, so that we can understand what do they need or want us to do. So very often communities have experienced people who want to do good coming in from the outside and, oh, we're going to fix it and make it great. And sometimes that process ends up causing more harm because the folks from the community were not asked to be involved in the first place. So before we try to fix things for folks, it's how aware are we? How much help can I offer? But before I act, what are the folks whose experience this is want, and would they welcome my help? What would be helpful coming from me? And only then do we act together. And then the accountability piece is, to keep acting with that question in mind. So liberatory consciousness really is about constantly asking. A friend of mine likes to say, what's my nickel in this quarter? And what he means is by that is like, what's my role? And when I work in collaboration with others, what do we do together? And how do we keep holding each other accountable? So I may tomorrow want to do something really helpful, join in with a group and don't spend enough time in analysis thinking about it. I just jump in because I've got a fix. I would hope somebody taps me on the shoulder and says, you know what, before we do another thing, let's press pause and check in with the folks whose experience this is. And so when we can act in these ways, then we have earned the right to be an ally. We can't name ourselves allies. People that we're with, partnering with, supporting, recognize us as allies. And when they do, we can say, yeah, oh, thank you. And I'm really happy to be helping and happy to appreciate being allowed to partner in this way. And that's collaboration and thank you, right? So accountability is the voice that says, oh, wait, did I step too far in this case? Or wait a minute, do I have a different standard? Am I holding somebody else more accountable than I'm holding myself? Right? How do we have those conversations and what are we looking at? So when we are acting in line with liberation, there's an authenticity, there's an honesty, there's a willingness to, again, press pause and think about how are we interacting? What are we doing? How are we thinking? And the press pause is for sharing and talking and making sure that you, each of you, and and me, that we're all showing up with an intention to be authentic about that. And so some things we can do. We can consider the power of language, right? Language is so amazing because we can contribute to each other's lives. We can express thoughts and feelings, but language is also used, verbally, in print, in virtual spaces to really cause harm. So we can lift each other up or we can tear each other down. And that one of the ways that we can do, and there's a great book for folks who have not read it, Crucial Conversations. I just highly recommend it for anybody who hasn't. Really, really helpful around thinking about how we're preparing for conversations, how are we holding each other both in esteem and in our care, even when we're holding people accountable, right? And so what are you committed to do around language and being aware of what you do? So some typical responses to hard conversations. One is avoidance and the other is aggression. And so avoidance is, this is not happening, I'm not doing it, I'm not seeing it. We get silent, we shut down, we ignore. And that is also violence. When we're not holding each other with care and kindness, right, then we're behaving in violent ways. And so there's lots of space, like there's a pendulum swing, there's a lot of space between doing nothing and being violent. And so probably in the middle is silence, because silence can be used to control. It doesn't get used to engage, right? So if we want to show up, we want to be here for one another, we have to be willing to have the hard conversations. And aggression, and I love this, it was another quote when I was looking around through my stuff, and it's like, it only moves in one direction. It creates more aggression. So that cycle will continue until we do something that stops it. And so part of that is, do we have openness? Do we have care and kindness? And can we listen and learn? When we are engaged in community and our community has a shared purpose, then we owe it to each other to show up for conversations. And when challenges are visible, and there's folks who are feeling, people are talking over each other, people are not hearing each other, people are not working together, or that there's some conflict and we're just really not able to connect for right now. I mean, that happens because we're human. But what it calls on us to do is to call each other in for dialogue. So again, the person who passes me on the street who says something offensive, awkward, ridiculous, I may choose to not engage because you know what? I don't have time to fix that problem. But when someone is in a group that I'm going to stay connected to, we have work to do together, then what I offer is that we invite each other in for conversation rather than call each other out. That we don't shame each other on Facebook and Instagram. We have conversation about what happened, the impact of what happened, and what is it that we need to do to repair our relationship. And that takes the two of us or the group of us, but creating space for doing that. Another of my favorite quotes. When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in service of my vision, it becomes less and less important whether I'm afraid. And why I chose this one in particular is that it can sometimes be scary to call each other in. It can be scarier to call each other in for conversation and to hang in on it and hang in with it until we've either resolved the disagreement, figured out the disconnect, or at least agreed that we have a disagreement here, but we don't have to be harsh to one another. We don't have to harm one another, right? And so I think it takes courage to call each in. I think it takes courage to practice humility, to say, I don't know, to recognize that, you know, I'm not the only important voice around this table. I was working with a group of folks who do training one day last week. And one of the things I said is that just because I'm the facilitator does not make me the most important person in this room. And so it's how do we think about being the connector for one another? And maybe it means responding in a different way than what we're comfortable doing. So I might be comfortable walking away. I might be comfortable, just saying what I have to say very loudly, dropping the mic and stepping out. But that's not what supports our group to our purpose. So what supports us to our purpose is humility and connection and willingness, even if we're afraid to engage in hard conversations. So the bottom line is that humility is really about how we connect to each other, how we offer dignity and respect, how we offer relationship, and how we consider both mutuality and liberation. So mutuality is that aspect of people's conversation and lives and connections where it's about sometimes I'm learning from you, sometimes you're learning from me, and that's possible and doable in all of our spaces because we can lead from any seat. So it's possible from any space we're in that many of us are leaders in those moments. But sometimes we can also set that leadership aside or down and just make space to hear another person and let that work because there's also space in that. And liberation says we work to remove all the barriers. So when our behavior is one of those barriers, it's up to us to set it down, to push it aside and to say, hey, I'm going to show up with my more authentic self. And it might be a more vulnerable self. It might be scary, but we're going to do it. And so another one of my favorite quotes is this: you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and that you have to do it all the time. So Angela Davis had a lot to say, and I think still has a lot to teach us around, to do transformative work. We are also constantly in the process of transforming ourselves. So I'm going to stop there. And if there's any questions, thoughts, or comments, I will make space for that.
Great. Thank you so much, Cathy. There are a couple of people that have put some comments into the chat box, the couple pieces around the crucial conversations. And then one person shared a quote from, I think it's Lilla Watson that Robin shared. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together.
It's beautiful. And it was one of the ones that I wanted to include, but I didn't have room for another space. And so I use that all the time. And it's Lila Watson is amazing. She's amazing. So thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it.